Terrifying deities, dazzling lights, and a detailed map of what happens after we die. The Bardo Thodol, or Tibetan Book of the Dead, claims to reveal it all. This ancient text challenges everything we think we know about life itself. Could its teachings really hold the key to escaping the endless cycle of life and death? Or does it leave us with more questions than answers?
The Bardo Thodol, often called the Tibetan Book of the Dead, is packed with mystery, symbolism, and ancient wisdom. Written by Padmasambhava, the founder of Tibetan Buddhism, and hidden away in the 8th century, it wasn't even meant for casual readers. It was intended as a guide for lamas to chant aloud, helping the deceased navigate the treacherous terrain between death and rebirth. But here's the kicker. The Bardo Thodol isn't just a spiritual manual. It's a roadmap to the workings of the mind, disguised in metaphor and mysticism. And yet, it's a text many modern Buddhists haven't even fully read. Why? Because it's as dense as it is fascinating, packed with symbols that take years of meditation to decode. So, what exactly are we decoding? The Bardo Thodol divides the afterlife into 6 distinct bardos or states, but only 3 pertain to the dead: the Chikai Bardo, Chonyid Bardo, and Sidpa Bardo. Each one is a psychological battlefield, filled with visions of deities, karmic mirrors, and the ever-looming possibility of being reborn into a less-than-ideal existence. The text insists that recognizing these visions for what they are, the projections of your own mind, can lead to liberation. But here's a curveball. These stages don't just happen after death. The teachings reveal that the bardos can occur during life as well, like lucid dreams or moments of deep meditation. That's right. The secrets of death are hiding in plain sight, woven into the fabric of everyday existence. To unlock these codes, you need to understand the language of the text itself. The Bardo Thodol doesn't give straightforward instructions. Instead, it paints vivid, surreal images. For example, it describes a dazzling white light that appears at the moment of death, a metaphor for the mind's pure, unconditioned state. But here's the twist. The text warns you might instinctively flee from this light because it's too intense, only to chase a softer, more familiar glow. That softer glow, it's the trap of samsara, the cycle of birth and rebirth. The text practically shouts, "Don't take the bait." And then there are the peaceful and wrathful deities, over 100 in total, who appeared during the Chonyid Bardo. At first glance, they might seem like external gods coming to judge you. But the Bardo Thodol flips that idea on its head. These figures aren't divine beings. They're you. Specifically, they're manifestations of your consciousness, reflecting your fears, desires, and karmic baggage. Think about that for a second. The terrifying deity chasing you in the Bardo isn't punishing you. It's a mirror showing you what you haven't resolved in life. Now, here's where it gets controversial. Scholars have debated for decades whether the Bardo Thodol was ever meant to be read literally. Some argue it's a psychological manual, a way to train the mind to confront its own illusions. Others insist it's a literal map of the afterlife, complete with cosmic waypoints. The debate took a dramatic turn in the mid-20th century, when Western thinkers like Carl Jung got their hands on the text. Jung, ever the psychologist, saw the bardos as archetypes of the unconscious mind, sparking a cultural fascination that still lingers today. But Tibetan lamas were less impressed. They accused the West of oversimplifying the text, reducing its spiritual depth to mere psychology. So, who's right? The Bardo Thodol also challenges the very nature of reality. One of its most startling claims is that the bardos are illusions, that dazzling white light, a construct of the mind, the wrathful deities, mind-made projections, even the concept of you traveling through these stages. Another illusion. The text dares you to ask, if everything I see, hear, and feel in the bardos is a projection, then what's real? This idea ties back to the Buddhist principle of shunyata, or emptiness, which states that all phenomena lack inherent existence. In other words, the Bardo Thodol asks you to question the nature of existence itself. But here's a shocking twist. Some Tibetan practitioners believe the Bardo Thodol is incomplete, a fragmented version of a much larger tradition. It's said that Padmasambhava hid many texts or termas across the Himalayan mountains to be discovered when the world was ready. Could it be that the Bardo Thodol is just one piece of a cosmic puzzle? And if so, what other secrets lie buried, waiting to be unearthed? Could the answers lie in the next Bardo, the Chikai Bardo, where the soul meets the dazzling light of truth, or its own worst fears? The Chikai Bardo, the first stage of the afterlife journey in the Bardo Thodol, begins at the very moment of death. It's here that the soul is ripped from the physical body and thrust into a new realm of existence. But contrary to what many might expect, this moment isn't portrayed as a peaceful drift into the great beyond. Instead, it's described as an intense, almost violent separation that reveals the true nature of existence. For those unprepared, it's a moment of chaos. For those who have trained their minds, it's an unparalleled opportunity for liberation. The Bardo Thodol describes the precise sequence of events at death with startling clarity. First, the dissolution of the body's elements begins. This isn't just poetic metaphor. It's an actual process that Tibetan Buddhists believe unfolds as the physical body shuts down. Earth, water, fire, and air, the four classical elements, gradually lose their grip on the individual. It starts with the earth element. The body becomes heavy, as if sinking into itself. Then, the water element recedes, causing dryness in the mouth and throat. Next, the fire element fades, and the body cools. Finally, the air element departs, leaving the dying person gasping for breath. What's left is pure consciousness, unshackled from the body. Now, according to Tibetan Buddhist teachings, this entire process is accompanied by vivid internal visions. As the elements dissolve, the dying person experiences specific sensations and imagery, like the feeling of being crushed by mountains or swept away by a flood. These are not just random hallucinations, but symbolic representations of the mind letting go of its attachments to the material world. The text warns that without proper preparation, these sensations can lead to overwhelming fear, causing the soul to cling to samsara, the endless cycle of death and rebirth. Then comes the great flash of light, the first, and perhaps most important, moment in the Chikai Bardo. The Bardo Thodol describes it as an all-encompassing, blinding white light that reveals the ultimate truth of reality. This is the clear light of the void, a manifestation of shunyata, or emptiness. It's the pure, unconditioned state of the mind, free from ego and illusion. But here's the kicker. Most people won't recognize it. The text explains that the light is so intense, so utterly unfamiliar, that the soul instinctively recoils from it. Instead, it gravitates towards softer, dimmer lights, symbols of attachment, desire, and the path back into samsara. This moment is the ultimate test. If the soul can recognize the clear light for what it is, liberation is possible, right then and there. But that's easier said than done. The Bardo Thodol cautions that only those who have meditated deeply on the nature of emptiness during their lifetime will be able to embrace the clear light without fear. For everyone else, the light becomes a missed opportunity, and the journey through the Bardos continues. Let's pause for a second. This idea of a blinding light at death isn't unique to Tibetan Buddhism. Across cultures, near-death experiences often include descriptions of a bright light drawing the person toward it. But here's what's fascinating. Tibetan teachings suggest that this light isn't external. It's not some divine being or heavenly gate. It's your own mind, stripped of its usual filters and distractions. The Bardo Thodol pushes you to ask a radical question. If the light at death is just a reflection of your mind, then what does that say about everything else you've ever experienced? The Chikai Bardo doesn't just stop at the clear light, though. If the soul fails to recognize it, a secondary light appears, less intense, but still profound. This is called the secondary clear light. And while it still offers a chance for liberation, it's considered a missed opportunity compared to the first. The text emphasizes that even at this stage, The soul must remain calm and unattached, recognizing the light as an expression of its own mind. Failure to do so means descending further into the bardos, where the challenges only multiply. Now, let's add a layer of controversy. In some interpretations, the Chikai Bardo is likened to the process of clinical death. Scholars and practitioners have speculated that the descriptions of light, dissolution, and detachment mirror what modern science calls the near-death experience. Take, for example, the case of Dr. Eben Alexander, a neurosurgeon who reported encountering a brilliant orb of light during a near-death experience in 2012. Could his account align with the clear light described in the Bardo Thodol, or are we just projecting ancient teachings onto modern phenomena? This debate has raged for decades with no clear consensus. What's more, the Chikai Bardo isn't just a guide for the dead, it's a lesson for the living. Tibetan lamas use these teachings to prepare for their own deaths, meditating on the clear light and practicing detachment from worldly desires. Some even enter a state called tukdam, where their body remains in meditative posture for days after death, showing no signs of decomposition. These cases, documented in monasteries across Tibet and India, defy explanation and add an eerie layer of mystery to the teachings. And yet, the Chikai Bardo raises unsettling questions. If the ultimate truth is revealed at the moment of death, why do so few recognize it? Is it because of fear, ignorance, or simply the mind's inability to let go of its illusions? And if the clear light is the key to liberation, then what does that mean for those who never prepared for this moment? But, perhaps, the most shocking question of all is this. Could the visions of the Chonyid Bardo, terrifying deities and karmic reflections, be the result of failing to embrace the clear light in the Chikai Bardo? Could this missed moment set the stage for even greater challenges ahead? The Sidpa Bardo, often referred to as the Bardo of Becoming, is the last and perhaps most consequential stage of the Bardo Thodol. This is where the stakes are highest. The soul stands at the crossroads of liberation and rebirth, grappling with karmic imprints, illusions, and the powerful pull of samsara. It's a realm of choice, or so it seems. But the decisions made here are heavily influenced by past actions and deep-rooted desires. For most, this is the moment when the cycle of life begins anew, plunging them into yet another existence shaped by their unresolved karma. As the Sidpa Bardo unfolds, the soul becomes increasingly aware of its impending rebirth. This awareness isn't always comforting. The Bardo Thodol describes the soul experiencing vivid, almost cinematic visions of potential lives. These are not random flashes, but deeply personal scenes that reflect the soul's karmic tendencies. For instance, someone with a history of greed might see themselves drawn to a life of wealth, while a soul consumed by anger might envision an existence marked by conflict. These visions are not merely predictive, they're persuasive, urging the soul to make a choice. But here's the catch. The Bardo Thodol warns that these choices are often illusory. The soul is not operating with full clarity, but is instead clouded by attachment, fear, and desire. This is where the teachings get brutally honest. The text doesn't shy away from stating that most souls fail to recognize the truth of their situation, falling into the traps of their own making. This leads them straight back into the cycle of samsara, with little awareness of how they got there. One of the most striking aspects of the Sidpa Bardo is the appearance of the womb door. This is not a literal door, but a symbolic representation of the soul's pull toward rebirth. The Bardo Thodol describes this as a scene where the soul is irresistibly drawn to a couple in the act of conception. Yes, it's as unsettling as it sounds. The text explains that the soul's attraction or aversion to the parents' union determines the nature of its next life. For example, feelings of desire toward the mother might result in rebirth as a male, while attraction to the father might lead to a female incarnation. But it's not as simple as it seems. This attraction is deeply karmic, shaped by the soul's past actions and mental patterns. The womb door isn't just about choosing a body, it's about the nature of the life that follows. If the soul enters the womb without clarity, it risks being born into circumstances that perpetuate suffering. But if the soul can maintain awareness and recognize the womb door for what it is, a projection of the mind, it has the opportunity to avoid rebirth altogether, achieving liberation instead. This is the ultimate goal of the Bardo Thodol, but achieving it is far from easy. Now let's talk about the terrifying imagery of the Sitpa Bardo. This stage is filled with visions of ferocious beings, chaotic landscapes, and overwhelming sensations. These are not random horrors, but reflections of the soul's unresolved fears and attachments. For example, a soul that clings to power might see itself pursued by towering, wrathful deities representing the collapse of control. A soul consumed by guilt might encounter rivers of fire or fields of suffering, each scene a vivid reminder of karmic consequences. Here's where it gets even more intense. The Bardo Thodol reveals that these terrifying visions are self-created. They're projections of the mind, shaped by the soul's inability to let go of its attachments. The text insists that recognizing this truth is the key to liberation. But for most, the fear is too overwhelming, causing the soul to flee toward the comfort of rebirth, even if it means another cycle of suffering. This concept raises a provocative question. If the visions of the Sitpa Bardo are self-generated, does that mean the soul is ultimately in control of its fate? The text suggests that this is both true and not true. While the soul's experiences are shaped by its own mind, those experiences are so deeply influenced by past karma that they feel inescapable. This paradox lies at the heart of Tibetan Buddhist teachings, challenging the very notion of free will. The Sitpa Bardo also introduces a fascinating twist: the role of the Bardo guide. In traditional Tibetan practice, a lama or spiritual teacher plays a crucial role in guiding the soul through the bardos, chanting the Bardo Thodol and offering instructions to help the soul recognize its true nature. In the Sitpa Bardo, these chants take on a heightened urgency, reminding the soul of its teachings and urging it to avoid the traps of rebirth. But here's the twist. What happens if the soul doesn't have a guide? The text implies that without guidance, the journey becomes exponentially more difficult, almost guaranteeing rebirth. This brings us to a critical point. The Sitpa Bardo is not just a teaching for the dead, but a wake-up call for the living. Tibetan Buddhism emphasizes that preparing for the Sitpa Bardo begins long before death. This preparation involves meditating on the nature of the mind, practicing detachment, and cultivating awareness. The Bardo Thodol even suggests that dreams can serve as practice runs for the bardos, offering a glimpse into the mind's projections and the power of awareness. Now, imagine a life lived with the constant awareness that every action, thought, and intention will shape your experience in the bardos. This is the essence of Tibetan Buddhist practice, living with the end in mind. It's all about breaking free from the entire cycle of existence, achieving a state of liberation that transcends life and death. And yet, the Sitpa Bardo leaves us with unsettling questions. If liberation is possible, why do so few achieve it? Is it because the pull of samsara is too strong, or because the teachings are too difficult to grasp? And what about those who don't have access to the Bardo Thodol or the guidance of a lama? Are they doomed to wander in confusion, repeating the same mistakes for eternity? The Bardo Thodol is not just a text for the deceased. It's also a vital tool for the living to guide those who have passed on. Tibetan Buddhism places immense importance on this role, emphasizing that the journey through the bardos is not a solitary endeavor. The presence of a skilled guide, often a lama or a close family member, can mean the difference between liberation and rebirth. The guiding process begins almost immediately after death. Tibetan tradition dictates that the Bardo Thodol should be read aloud to the deceased, beginning with instructions for the Chikai Bardo. The guide doesn't simply deliver a sermon, they speak directly to the soul, addressing it as if it were present in the room. This intimate communication is meant to remind the soul of the teachings it learned in life, especially the need to recognize the clear light of ultimate reality. For the untrained, the moments following death are disorienting, and the guide's voice acts as a beacon, cutting through the chaos. Here's where things get fascinating. The guide doesn't just stick to a script. The Bardo Thodol offers detailed instructions on how to adapt the guidance based on the soul's reactions. If the soul fails to recognize the clear light in the Chikai Bardo, the guide shifts focus to the visions of peaceful and wrathful deities in the Chonyid Bardo. The language becomes more urgent, urging the soul to recognize these deities as projections of its own mind. This flexibility highlights the text's profound understanding of human psychology. The soul's journey is unpredictable, and the guide must be ready to respond to its unique challenges. The role of the guide isn't limited to monks or spiritual teachers. In Tibetan Buddhist communities, family members often play a crucial part in the ritual process. They prepare the body for death, create an atmosphere of calm and reverence, and even participate in chanting the Bardo Thodol. This collective effort reflects the Buddhist belief in interconnectedness. Death is not seen as an isolated event, but as a communal experience, where the living and the dead remain deeply intertwined. One of the most intriguing aspects of this guidance is the use of Phawa, or the transference of consciousness. This advanced meditation practice involves visualizing the soul's consciousness, leaving the body, and entering a state of liberation. In some cases, the guide performs Phawa on behalf of the deceased, essentially acting as a surrogate for their spiritual journey. Stories of Phawa masters achieving extraordinary feats, like leaving visible marks on the skulls of the deceased as a sign of liberation, are common in Tibetan Buddhist lore. These accounts, while difficult to verify, add an almost supernatural dimension to the role of the guide. Western scholars and skeptics have questioned the effectiveness of guiding the dead through the bardos, arguing that it relies heavily on the belief that the soul remains conscious after death. This debate reached its peak in the 20th century, when figures like Walter Evans Wentz, the first Western translator of the Bardo Thodol, introduced the text to a global audience. Critics accused Evans Wentz of romanticizing Tibetan culture and ignoring the practical challenges of interpreting such an esoteric text. Tibetan lamas, on the other hand, defended the practice, insisting that the rituals are grounded in centuries of spiritual tradition. What makes this even more complex is the modern reinterpretation of these practices in Western contexts. Today, some practitioners use the Bardo Thodol not as a guide for the dead, but as a framework for understanding psychological states in life. This shift has sparked heated debates within Buddhist circles, with traditionalists warning against diluting the text's spiritual significance. Yet, there's no denying that the idea of guiding someone through transitional states, whether in death or life, resonates deeply with people across cultures. The rituals surrounding the Bardo Thodol also extend beyond the immediate aftermath of death. In Tibetan Buddhism, the soul's journey through the bardos is believed to last 49 days. During this time, lamas and family members continue to perform rituals, offering prayers and making symbolic offerings to ease the soul's passage. One of the most well-known rituals is the Sur, where food and other items are burned to create a fragrant smoke, symbolically nourishing the soul. This practice is not just about helping the deceased. It's also a way for the living to process their grief and reaffirm their connection to the departed. What's particularly striking is the meticulous attention to detail in these rituals. Every aspect, from the type of offerings made to the mantras chanted, is designed to align with the specific needs of the soul at each stage of the bardos. For example, during the Chonyid Bardo, offerings might include images of peaceful and wrathful deities, reminding the soul to recognize them as projections. In the Sidpa Bardo, the focus shifts to detachment, with rituals aimed at breaking the soul's attachments to the material world. This level of precision underscores the depth of understanding embedded in Tibetan Buddhist practices. Let's not overlook the emotional weight of these rituals. For the living, guiding the dead is as much a spiritual duty as it is an act of love. The Bardo Thodol emphasizes that the guide's intentions must be pure, free from selfish desires or unresolved attachments. This is no small task. Imagine chanting mantras for hours on end, knowing that your loved one's fate could depend on your ability to remain focused and calm. It's a profound responsibility, one that requires immense dedication and compassion. But what happens when there is no guide? The Bardo Thodol paints a sobering picture of the soul wandering aimlessly, confused and vulnerable to the illusions of the Bardos. This scenario is not uncommon in today's world, where traditional practices are often lost or overlooked. Tibetan Buddhists have expressed growing concern over this issue, particularly as their culture faces pressures from globalization and modernization. Some monasteries have started adapting their rituals, creating online resources and recordings of the Bardo Thodol to ensure that no soul is left unguided. So, do we think that the ancient teachings of the Bardo Thodol survive in a digital age? Monks have argued that while the medium may change, the essence of the teachings remains the same. Others worry that the shift to modern platforms risks oversimplifying the text, stripping it of its nuance and depth. This tension reflects the broader challenge of preserving spiritual traditions in an ever-changing world. And yet, the guiding practices of the Bardo Thodol offer a timeless lesson. The journey through death is not a solitary one. Whether through chants, rituals, or meditative practices, the living have the power to support the dead in ways that transcend physical boundaries. But this guidance is not guaranteed. It requires preparation, understanding, and a willingness to confront the mysteries of existence. As we get deeper into these teachings, one question lingers. If the living can guide the dead, what does that say about the power of connection and intention in life? And could the same principles apply to the living guiding themselves through the bardos of existence before death even arrives? The Bardo Thodol has long been considered a mystical guide, rooted in Tibetan Buddhist spirituality, but it is increasingly attracting attention from scientists and researchers. How do the teachings align with modern understandings of consciousness, death, and the brain? While some argue that the bardos are purely metaphysical, others suggest they offer surprising parallels to what science is beginning to uncover about the human mind and near-death experiences. This intersection of ancient wisdom and cutting-edge research raises questions that are as exciting as they are unsettling. To start, let's consider the Bardo Thodol's description of the clear light experienced at the moment of death. Tibetan teachings emphasize that this brilliant white light represents the pure, unconditioned state of the mind. Interestingly, many people who have had near-death experiences report seeing a similar light, a radiant, all-encompassing glow that feels profoundly peaceful. Dr. Raymond Moody, in his groundbreaking book Life After Life, published in the 1970s, detailed hundreds of such accounts. These individuals often describe moving toward the light, feeling a sense of unconditional love and unity. The similarity to the Bardo Thodol's clear light is striking, prompting some to wonder whether the text anticipated what modern science is only now exploring. But the thing is that neuroscience has identified phenomena that could explain these experiences. When the brain begins to shut down, whether due to lack of oxygen, trauma, or other factors, it undergoes a series of neurological changes. Researchers have found that during this process, the brain's visual cortex becomes hyperactive, potentially creating the perception of a bright light. Similarly, the release of endorphins and other chemicals could account for the feelings of peace and euphoria reported in near-death experiences. But is this purely a biological process? Or could it also reflect something deeper, as the Bardo Thodol suggests? Another point of intersection lies in the text descriptions of the vivid visions experienced in the bardos. During the Chonyid Bardo, the deceased encounter peaceful and wrathful deities, archetypal figures that represent different aspects of the mind. Modern psychology, particularly the work of Carl Jung, has drawn parallels between these deities and the archetypes of the unconscious mind. Jung believed that these symbolic figures emerged during moments of profound psychological upheaval, such as near death. Could the deities described in the Bardo Thodol be early representations of the universal patterns Jung identified? Let's take this a step further. Studies on altered states of consciousness, whether induced by meditation, psychedelics, or near-death experiences, have revealed that the brain often generates complex symbolic imagery. Dr. Rick Strassman's research on DMT, or dimethyltryptamine, a powerful psychedelic compound, is particularly intriguing. In his studies, participants frequently reported encountering beings that seemed intelligent, otherworldly, and deeply symbolic. These accounts bear a remarkable resemblance to the descriptions of deities in the Chonyid Bardo. Some researchers speculate that DMT, naturally produced in small amounts by the brain, could play a role in the vivid visions reported during near-death experiences, and possibly even during death itself. Could the Bardo Thodol be describing states of consciousness linked to the brain's biochemistry? The Sidpa Bardo, with its focus on rebirth, also raises questions that resonate with modern science. The text emphasizes that karmic imprints, mental and emotional patterns developed during life, shape the circumstances of rebirth. This aligns with the concept of neuroplasticity, which shows how repeated thoughts and behaviors physically alter the brain. Essentially, the brain wires itself based on the habits and patterns we cultivate, which could be seen as a scientific parallel to the karmic conditioning described in the Bardo Thodol. While science doesn't address rebirth in a literal sense, it does support the idea that our experiences and choices profoundly shape our future states of being. Now, let's pivot to one of the most contentious intersections between science and the Bardo Thodol, the continuity of consciousness after death. Tibetan Buddhism holds that consciousness persists beyond the body, navigating the bardos before achieving liberation or rebirth. Modern science, by contrast, tends to view consciousness as a product of the brain, ceasing when the brain dies. Yet, some recent studies challenge this assumption. Dr. Sam Parnia's research into cardiac arrest survivors, for instance, has documented cases where individuals reported lucid, detailed experiences during periods of clinically defined death, when their brains showed no measurable activity. These accounts raise profound questions about the nature of consciousness and whether it can exist independently of the brain. One of the most provocative theories emerging from these studies is the idea that consciousness might be non-local, that is, not confined to the brain. This concept has been explored in quantum physics, particularly in the work of physicist Roger Penrose and anesthesiologist Stuart Hameroff. Their controversial theory suggests that consciousness arises from quantum processes in the brain's microtubules and could potentially continue beyond physical death. While far from proven, this idea opens the door to interpretations that align more closely with the Bardo Thodol's teachings. But the Bardo Thodol doesn't just describe death. It also offers insights into the nature of reality itself. The text repeatedly emphasizes that the bardos are projections of the mind, illusions that must be recognized as such to achieve liberation. This idea resonates with the Buddhist concept of shunyata, or emptiness, which holds that all phenomena lack inherent existence. Strikingly, this aligns with some interpretations of quantum mechanics, which suggests that reality is not fixed, but is instead shaped by observation. Could the Bardo Thodol be hinting at truths that science is only beginning to uncover? But the dialogue between science and the Bardo Thodol is not without its critics. Some argue that drawing parallels between these fields risks oversimplifying both. They caution against reducing the text's spiritual teachings to mere psychological or neurological phenomena, warning that such interpretations strip away its depth and sacredness. On the other hand, proponents of this dialogue argue that exploring these connections can deepen our understanding of both science and spirituality, bridging the gap between seemingly disparate worldviews. The implications of this intersection are profound. If the bardos are understood not just as stages of the afterlife, but as states of consciousness accessible in life, they could offer a new framework for understanding the human experience. Practices like meditation, dream analysis, and even psychedelic therapy could be seen as ways of exploring the bardos, preparing for the ultimate transition of death. This perspective has already begun to influence fields like psychology, where mindfulness and other Buddhist-inspired practices are being integrated into therapeutic approaches. Let's not overlook the ethical questions this dialogue raises. If science were to confirm aspects of the Bardo Thodol, such as the persistence of consciousness, how would that change our approach to death and dying? Would it lead to greater reverence for the dying process? Or would it open the door to new technologies aimed at controlling or manipulating the journey through death? These possibilities are both exciting and unsettling, challenging us to think deeply about the intersection of science, spirituality, and ethics. As we examine these connections, one thing becomes clear. The Bardo Thodol is far more than an ancient text. It's a lens through which we can explore some of the most profound questions about life, death, and the nature of reality. And this brings us to yet another question. If the bardos are not just metaphors, but actual states of consciousness, what does that mean for how we live and die? And are we ready to confront the implications of such a realization? One of the central messages of the book is that the experiences of the bardos are not limited to the afterlife. In fact, Tibetan Buddhism reveals that we encounter similar states of consciousness every day, particularly in deep meditation and dreams. These moments serve as miniature versions of the bardos, offering a chance to practice for the ultimate journey after death. But what does that really mean, and how does it work? To begin, let's consider meditation, one of the most revered practices in Tibetan Buddhism. Advanced meditators train to experience states of clarity and detachment that mirror the luminous experiences described in the Chikai Bardo. When practitioners enter profound meditative states, they begin to strip away the layers of the ego, dissolving the attachments that tether them to samsara. In the highest stages of meditation, known as samadhi, the mind reaches a state of pure awareness, often described as an encounter with the clear light. Sound familiar? It's no coincidence. This is the same clear light that appears at the moment of death, as detailed in the Bardo Thodol. But this isn't just a coincidence. The Bardo Thodol suggests that meditation is the most powerful tool for preparing for death, because it trains the mind to recognize its true nature. By repeatedly encountering the clear light in meditation, practitioners are more likely to recognize it during the Chikai Bardo and achieve liberation. Stories from Tibetan Buddhist masters, like Milarepa, a famed 11th century yogi, illustrate this point. Milarepa spent years meditating in isolation, mastering his mind and transcending fear. When he passed away, his disciples reported extraordinary signs, such as rainbow light emanating from his body, symbols that he had achieved liberation. Now let's turn to dreams, another powerful connection to the bardos. Tibetan Buddhism teaches that dreams are not just meaningless images or random brain activity. They are a reflection of the mind and a gateway to deeper awareness. In fact, the practice of dream yoga, or milam, is considered a vital preparation for navigating the bardos. Dream yoga involves becoming lucid in dreams, aware that you are dreaming, and using that awareness to explore the nature of reality. Just as the Bardo Thodol describes deities and visions as projections of the mind, dream yoga reveals that everything experienced in a dream is also a projection. This realization allows practitioners to confront fears, attachments, and desires in the dream state, mirroring the challenges faced in the bardos. For instance, a practitioner encountering a terrifying figure in a dream learns to recognize it as a product of their own mind, rather than an external threat. The same skill is critical in the bardos, where recognizing projections can mean the difference between liberation and rebirth. One of the most extraordinary aspects of dream yoga is its ability to blur the lines between waking and dreaming reality. Advanced practitioners report achieving states of awareness where dreams feel as vivid and real as waking life. This directly parallels the Bardo Thodol's assertion that the bardos are as real as life itself, and just as illusory. Both teachings challenge the notion of an objective reality, suggesting instead that all experiences are shaped by the mind. But dream yoga isn't just about philosophical insights. It's also a practical training ground. Imagine practicing how to remain calm in the face of terrifying dream figures, knowing that those skills will one day help you face the wrathful deities of the Chonyid Bardo. Or imagine learning to dissolve a dreamscape into pure light, a preparation for recognizing the clear light in the Chikai Bardo. For Tibetan Buddhists, these practices are not hypothetical. They're essential. Modern science, surprisingly, has begun to echo these teachings. Lucid dreaming, a phenomenon where individuals become aware that they are dreaming, has been extensively studied in recent years. Researchers like Dr. Stephen LaBerge have shown that lucid dreaming can be used to confront fears, explore the subconscious, and even practice real-world skills. While these studies often focus on psychological benefits, they also hint at deeper connections between dreams, consciousness, and reality, connections that align closely with Tibetan Buddhist teachings. Let's not forget the concept of Tukdam, another fascinating link between meditation, dreams, and death. Tukdam refers to a meditative state achieved by advanced practitioners during and after death. In this state, the practitioner's consciousness remains focused and calm, even as the body shows signs of physical death. In some cases, the body doesn't decompose for days or even weeks, an extraordinary phenomenon documented in Tibetan monasteries. Monks observing Tukdam describe it as a final intentional encounter with the bardos, where the practitioner guides their own consciousness toward liberation. These practices, meditation, dream yoga, and Tukdam, all share a common goal: mastering the mind. The Bardo Thodol repeatedly emphasizes that the bardos are not external realms, but reflections of the mind's own projections. This means that liberation depends entirely on the individual's ability to recognize and transcend their illusions. Meditation and dreams provide a unique opportunity to rehearse this recognition, encountering the same projections and challenges faced in the bardos. Here's a question worth thinking about. If the bardos, meditation, and dreams are all reflections of the mind, does that mean they are ultimately the same experience? And if so, what does that say about the nature of reality itself? Tibetan Buddhism suggests that all experiences, whether in life, death, or dreams, are manifestations of the mind's infinite potential. This idea not only blurs the boundaries between states of consciousness, but also challenges the very concept of an objective world. Critics, however, argue that these teachings are overly abstract, making them difficult for modern practitioners to grasp. Meditation and dream yoga require immense discipline, and achieving Tukdam is an extraordinary rarity. Yet, even those who practice at a basic level can benefit. Mindfulness practices, now popular in the West, draw directly from Tibetan traditions, offering a simplified but accessible way to explore the mind's potential. But let's not overlook the profound implications of these teachings. If meditation and dreams can mirror the bardos, does that mean we are constantly rehearsing for death, whether we realize it or not? And if every experience is a projection of the mind, how do we distinguish between illusion and reality? The Bardo Thodol offers one possible answer: through awareness. Awareness is the thread that connects all states of consciousness, from waking to dreaming to the bardos. It's not about clinging to one state over another, but recognizing the illusory nature of all experience. This awareness, cultivated through meditation and dream yoga, becomes the key to navigating not only the bardos, but life itself. So if we can train ourselves to recognize the projections of the mind in meditation and dreams, can we also learn to do so in the bardos? And if liberation is possible in any state of consciousness, what's stopping us from achieving it right now? At the heart of the Bardo Thodol lies a choice so profound it determines the ultimate destiny of the soul: to break free from samsara, the endless cycle of birth, death, and rebirth, or to remain trapped within it. This isn't just a philosophical idea, it's a visceral, moment-to-moment struggle that plays out in the bardos. Every vision, every emotion, and every decision the soul encounters in these intermediate states serves one of two purposes: liberation or continued existence. But why is it so difficult to escape? And why do most souls fail to break free? The answers are as intricate as they are unsettling. To understand the stakes, let's first examine samsara itself. Often described as a wheel, samsara represents the cyclical nature of existence, driven by karma and conditioned by ignorance and attachment. Life after life, beings are born, live, die, and are reborn, carrying the imprints of past actions and desires. For those unprepared, this cycle is almost impossible to break. The Bardo Thodol describes samsara as a trap, a web of illusions that ensnare the soul through fear, craving, and confusion. Yet it also insists that liberation is always possible, even in the most dire circumstances. The bardos themselves are pivotal moments in this cosmic drama. Each stage offers the soul an opportunity to see through the illusions of samsara and achieve enlightenment. In the Chikai Bardo, the clear light presents the ultimate truth. but many souls are too overwhelmed to embrace it. In the Chonyid Bardo, the visions of peaceful and wrathful deities reveal the mind's true nature, yet fear often drives the soul away from liberation. By the time the Sidpa Bardo begins, the soul is entangled in karmic forces, pulled toward rebirth, as if caught in a powerful current. Here's where the Bardo Thodol takes an almost startlingly compassionate tone. It doesn't blame the soul for its failures. Instead, it acknowledges the sheer difficulty of the task. The text compares the process to trying to balance on the edge of a sword. One misstep, and the chance for liberation is lost. But why is the pull of samsara so strong? The answer lies in karma. Karma, in the context of Tibetan Buddhism, is not just about actions, but also the intentions and mental patterns behind them. Every thought, word, and deed leaves an imprint on the mind stream, shaping the soul's experiences in life, death, and rebirth. In the Bardos, these karmic imprints take on a tangible form. The Bardo Thodol describes how past actions manifest as vivid visions, emotions, and even physical sensations. A soul burdened by greed, for example, might be drawn toward illusions of wealth, while one consumed by anger might find itself surrounded by scenes of conflict. These karmic forces act like magnets, pulling the soul toward specific rebirth scenarios. Now, the text emphasizes that karma is not deterministic. It doesn't lock the soul into a fixed path, but instead creates tendencies and inclinations. Liberation, therefore, is always possible, even for the most burdened soul. The key lies in awareness, recognizing these karmic imprints as projections of the mind rather than external realities. This is where the teachings of the Bardo Thodol become both profound and practical. One of the text's most striking teachings is the concept of recognition. It insists that the soul's journey through the Bardos hinges on its ability to recognize the true nature of its experiences. This recognition is not intellectual, but experiential, a direct intuitive understanding that everything encountered in the Bardos is a manifestation of the mind. For those who achieve this recognition, liberation is immediate. For those who don't, the cycle of samsara continues. Let's talk about the womb door, one of the most visceral and symbolic moments in the Sidpa Bardo. This scene represents the final opportunity for the soul to escape samsara before rebirth. The Bardo Thodol describes how the soul, driven by karmic forces, is drawn toward a specific set of parents. The attraction or aversion it feels toward these parents determines its next incarnation. What's more is that the text reveals that this attraction is often fueled by ignorance and desire. The soul mistakes the process of conception for a chance at happiness, failing to see it as another cycle of suffering. For those who manage to maintain awareness at this critical juncture, there is still hope. The Bardo Thodol provides specific instructions for recognizing the womb door as an illusion and rejecting it. By doing so, the soul can avoid rebirth entirely, achieving liberation instead. But for most, the pull of samsara proves too strong, and the cycle begins anew. But if liberation is possible, why do so few achieve it? The Bardo Thodol offers a sobering answer. It explains that the habits of the mind, formed over countless lifetimes, are incredibly difficult to break. These habits, known as mental afflictions or kleshas, include ignorance, attachment, and aversion. They act as blinders, preventing the soul from seeing the true nature of its experiences. Let's pause and reflect on this for a moment. If the Bardos are mirrors of the mind, then the struggle to escape samsara is not just about external circumstances. It's an internal battle. The Bardo Thodol suggests that the real prison is not samsara itself, but the mind's inability to see beyond its illusions. This idea is both liberating and daunting. It places the power of liberation entirely in the hands of the individual, yet it also highlights the immense effort required to achieve it. Now, let's consider how Tibetan Buddhist practices aim to prepare individuals for this journey. Meditation, dream yoga, and the recitation of the Bardo Thodol are all designed to cultivate the awareness and clarity needed to navigate the Bardos. These practices emphasize mindfulness, detachment, and the recognition of the mind's true nature. By mastering these skills in life, practitioners increase their chances of achieving liberation after death. But what about those who don't have access to these teachings? The Bardo Thodol acknowledges this reality and offers hope. It explains that even the simplest acts of kindness and compassion can create positive karmic imprints, paving the way for better circumstances in future lives. In this sense, the teachings are not exclusive. They are accessible to anyone willing to engage with them. The Bardo Thodol also suggests that samsara itself is not entirely negative. While it is often described as a cycle of suffering, it also offers opportunities for growth, learning, and the accumulation of wisdom. Each life, no matter how challenging, provides a chance to develop the qualities needed for liberation. This perspective shifts the narrative, framing samsara not as a punishment, but as a teacher. And yet, the question remains, why do so many souls continue to choose samsara over liberation? The answer may lie in the comfort of the familiar. The Bardo Thodol describes how souls cling to their attachments, even when those attachments lead to suffering. This clinging is not just a habit, it's a deeply ingrained instinct, rooted in the fear of the unknown. Liberation requires the courage to let go of everything, including the self. And this is a step that many are unwilling or unable to take. When the Bardo Thodol was introduced to the West in the early 20th century, it sent ripples through the worlds of philosophy, psychology, and spirituality. This ancient Tibetan text was not just a guide for the dead. It became a mirror for Western thought, reflecting and refracting ideas about consciousness, death, and the self. It wasn't long before philosophers, psychologists, and even artists began to draw parallels between the teachings of the Bardo Thodol and their own fields of inquiry. But what was it about this esoteric Buddhist text that captivated the Western mind so profoundly? The first Western scholar to bring the Bardo Thodol to global attention was Walter Evans Wentz. His translation, The Tibetan Book of the Dead, published in 1927, was groundbreaking. Evans Wentz, however, was no Tibetan Buddhist. He approached the text through a Western theosophical lens, interpreting it in ways that blended Eastern mysticism with his own esoteric beliefs. This approach was controversial. While his translation introduced millions to the Bardo Thodol, it also skewed its original meaning, focusing more on universal spiritual themes than the text's deeply Buddhist roots. Despite the inaccuracies, Evans Wentz's work sparked an intellectual frenzy. One of the first to embrace the Bardo Thodol was Carl Jung, the Swiss psychoanalyst. Jung saw the bardos not as metaphysical realms, but as archetypal stages of the unconscious mind. For Jung, the peaceful and wrathful deities of the Chonyid Bardo were projections of the psyche, symbolic representations of repressed desires, fears, and potentials. He even went so far as to compare the Bardo Thodol to the process of individuation, a journey of integrating the conscious and unconscious self. Jung's interpretation had a profound impact. By framing the Bardo Thodol in psychological terms, he made it accessible to a Western audience that was more familiar with Freud than Padmasambhava. But his approach also raised questions. Did reducing the bardos to psychological archetypes strip the text of its spiritual depth? Tibetan lamas certainly thought so. Many criticized Jung's interpretation as overly simplistic, arguing that it missed the text's ultimate goal, liberation from samsara. The impact of the Bardo Thodol didn't stop with psychology. Western existentialists, grappling with the meaning of life and death, found echoes of their own struggles in the text. Thinkers like Jean-Paul Sartre and Martin Heidegger were fascinated by the Tibetan perspective on impermanence and the nature of existence. While they didn't directly reference the Bardo Thodol, its influence can be felt in their writings, particularly in their exploration of anxiety, freedom, and the confrontation with death. The counterculture movements of the 1960s brought a new wave of interest in the Bardo Thodol. This era, marked by a fascination with Eastern spirituality, saw figures like Timothy Leary and Richard Alpert, who became later known as Ram Dass, embrace the text as a guide not just for death, but for life. Leary in particular drew controversial parallels between the bardos and the stages of a psychedelic experience. His book, The Psychedelic Experience, co-written with Alpert and Ralph Metzner, explicitly modeled its structure on the Bardo Thodol. The authors argued that LSD, like the bardos, could dissolve the ego and reveal the true nature of the mind. This comparison was not without its detractors. Tibetan Buddhist scholars criticized Leary for trivializing the Bardo Thodol, arguing that equating sacred teachings with drug experiences undermined their spiritual significance. Yet, for better or worse, Leary's work cemented the Bardo Thodol's place in the Western counterculture, introducing it to a new generation of seekers. Artists and writers were also captivated by the Bardo Thodol. Beat poets like Allen Ginsberg and Jack Kerouac, both deeply influenced by Buddhism, wove its themes into their work. Ginsberg's poem Kaddish reflects a raw, almost Bardo-like exploration of grief and impermanence, while Kerouac's Dharma Bums captures the restless search for spiritual truth. Meanwhile, in the visual arts, surrealists like Salvador Dali found inspiration in the Bardo Thodol's vivid imagery, using it to explore the boundaries between reality and dream. Even Hollywood couldn't resist the allure of the bardos. Films like Enter the Void, directed by Gaspar Noé, explicitly draw on the Bardo Thodol, portraying a psychedelic journey through death and rebirth. While not always faithful to the text, these interpretations highlight its enduring appeal as a lens for exploring the mysteries of existence. One of the most significant contributions of the Bardo Thodol to Western thought is its challenge to the dualistic view of life and death. In Western philosophy, life and death are often seen as opposites, separated by an unbridgeable divide. The Bardo Thodol, however, presents a radically different perspective. It sees life and death as part of a continuous cycle, with the bardos serving as transitional states rather than endpoints. This perspective resonated deeply with process philosophers like Alfred North Whitehead, who emphasized the interconnectedness and fluidity of existence. The text's emphasis on the mind as the creator of reality also found a receptive audience among Western thinkers. This idea, central to Tibetan Buddhism, challenges the materialist view that consciousness is merely a byproduct of the brain. Instead, it suggests that consciousness is primary, shaping and even creating the world we experience. This aligns with certain interpretations of quantum mechanics, particularly the idea that observation shapes reality. Philosophers like David Bohm, who explored the relationship between consciousness and the physical universe, found intriguing parallels between their work and the teachings of the Bardo Thodol. But not all reactions to the Bardo Thodol have been positive. Critics argue that its growing popularity in the West has led to oversimplification and cultural appropriation. They point to the way the text has been repackaged as a self-help manual or a psychedelic guide, often divorced from its Buddhist context. This critique raises important questions. Can the Bardo Thodol truly be understood outside of its spiritual framework? And if not, what are the implications of its widespread adoption in the West? Despite these controversies, the Bardo Thodol has undeniably enriched Western philosophy and culture. Its teachings have inspired deep reflections on the nature of consciousness, the meaning of life and death, and the possibilities of liberation. At the same time, its journey into the West highlights the challenges of translating sacred texts across cultures, reminding us of the delicate balance between accessibility and authenticity. So, if the Bardo Thodol has already reshaped Western thought in so many ways, what other insights does it hold, waiting to be discovered? And could its teachings offer not just a guide for the dead, but a profound new perspective on how to live? When compared to other sacred texts, the Bardo Thodol reveals fascinating parallels and stark contrasts that illuminate the universality of human questions about life, death, and what comes next. From the Egyptian Book of the Dead to the Bhagavad Gita and even Christian and Islamic teachings, the exploration of these intersections sheds light on how different traditions approach the mysteries of existence. One of the most obvious comparisons is with the Egyptian Book of the Dead, an ancient guide to navigating the afterlife. Like the Bardo Thodol, it provides instructions for the soul's journey after death, focusing on overcoming obstacles and achieving a favorable judgment. The Egyptian Book of the Dead describes the weighing of the heart, a ritual where the deceased's heart is measured against the feather of Ma'at, the goddess of truth and justice. A balanced heart leads to eternal peace, while a heavy one condemns the soul to destruction. The Bardo Thodol and the Egyptian Book of the Dead share a critical similarity. Both emphasize the importance of preparation during life for the challenges faced after death. However, their core philosophies diverge. The Tibetan text views the afterlife as a series of mental projections, with liberation achieved through recognizing the illusory nature of these experiences. In contrast, the Egyptian text treats the afterlife as a literal journey through physical realms, where the soul encounters gods, demons, and gates that must be passed to reach eternity. This difference reflects their cultural and spiritual contexts, with Tibetan Buddhism rooted in the mind's transcendence and Egyptian spirituality focused on divine judgment and cosmic order. Moving eastward, the Bhagavad Gita offers another intriguing comparison. Although not a guide to the afterlife per se, the Gita delves deeply into the nature of death, karma, and liberation. In this ancient Hindu scripture, Lord Krishna advises the warrior Arjuna on how to face life's ultimate transitions, including death. Krishna's teachings emphasize detachment and the immortality of the soul, stating, "As a person sheds worn-out garments and wears new ones, so the soul discards worn-out bodies and enters new ones." This perspective aligns with the Bardo Thodol's concept of rebirth, where the soul moves from one existence to another, influenced by karmic forces. However, the Bhagavad Gita introduces the idea of bhakti, devotion to a personal deity, as a path to liberation, contrasting with the Tibetan emphasis on self-realization and mindfulness. Additionally, the Gita places less emphasis on the intermediate states of consciousness, focusing instead on the soul's eternal journey and its union with the divine. Turning to Christianity, the Bardo Thodol presents fascinating parallels and striking differences. Christian teachings often depict the afterlife as a binary outcome, heaven or hell, determined by one's faith and deeds. While this dualistic framework contrasts sharply with the Tibetan cycle of samsara, both traditions stress the importance of preparation during life. Christian rituals, like last rites and prayers for the dead, echo the Tibetan practice of guiding the soul through its journey, suggesting a shared recognition of death as a profound transition. One particularly compelling parallel is the concept of judgment. In Tibetan Buddhism, karmic imprints determine the soul's path, mirroring the Christian idea of divine judgment based on earthly deeds. However, the Bardo Thodol portrays this process not as the decision of an external deity, but as an internal reckoning. The visions of wrathful deities in the Bardos are reflections of the soul's own mind, a stark contrast to the Christian view of an external god, rendering judgment. This difference highlights a key divergence. Tibetan Buddhism emphasizes self-liberation through awareness, while Christianity relies on divine grace. Islamic teachings on the afterlife also offer intriguing comparisons. The Quran describes the soul's journey after death, including the crossing of the Sirat Bridge, a razor-thin path spanning the fires of hell. Like the Bardo Thodol, Islamic eschatology emphasizes the soul's actions and intentions during life, which determine its ultimate fate. Both traditions view death not as an end, but as a transformation, a gateway to a different state of existence. However, Islamic teachings are more prescriptive about the nature of the afterlife, describing vivid scenes of paradise and hell. The Bardo Thodol, in contrast, presents the afterlife as a fluid, subjective experience, shaped entirely by the mind's projections. This divergence underscores the Tibetan focus on inner transformation and the Islamic emphasis on adherence to divine law. Beyond religious texts, indigenous traditions also resonate with the teachings of the Bardo Thodol. Many Native American cultures, for example, view death as a journey, where the soul must navigate spiritual realms before reaching its final destination. These traditions often incorporate rituals to guide the deceased, such as offerings, chants, and prayers, mirroring Tibetan practices. The Cherokee belief in the Night Road, a path the soul must walk after death, shares similarities with the Tibetan concept of the Bardos as a transitional state. Both traditions emphasize the role of community and ritual in supporting the soul's journey, reflecting a universal recognition of death's significance. The intersections don't end there. The Mexican Dia de los Muertos, or the Day of the Dead tradition, rooted in Aztec beliefs, also parallels the Bardo Todol. This celebration honors the deceased, offering food, flowers, and prayers to support their journey in the afterlife. While the cultural contexts differ, both traditions highlight the importance of maintaining a connection between the living and the dead, underscoring the idea that death is not a separation, but a continuation. Even modern philosophical movements have drawn inspiration from the Bardo Todol. Existentialists, grappling with the meaning of death, have found parallels in the Tibetan emphasis on impermanence and the illusion of the self. Philosophers like Jean-Paul Sartre and Martin Heidegger explored themes of anxiety and authenticity, resonating with the Bardo Todol's call to confront fear and embrace awareness. Similarly, process philosophers like Alfred North Whitehead, who emphasized the interconnectedness of existence, found echoes of their ideas in the Tibetan concept of samsara and the cyclical nature of life and death. In contemporary psychology, the Bardo Todol has influenced practices like mindfulness and acceptance-based therapies. The text's emphasis on recognizing mental projections aligns with psychological techniques that help individuals observe and detach from their thoughts. While these practices often strip away the spiritual context, they demonstrate the universal applicability of Tibetan teachings to the human experience. The Bardo Todol also challenges cultural assumptions about death itself. In many Western societies, death is treated as a taboo topic, avoided and feared. The Tibetan tradition, by contrast, views death as an integral part of life, a natural transition that offers profound opportunities for growth and liberation. This perspective has begun to influence end-of-life care in the West, inspiring practices like death meditation and the development of hospice programs that emphasize dignity and mindfulness. These cross-cultural connections raise important questions. How do different traditions shape our understanding of death and the afterlife? Can the insights of one culture enhance the practices of another? And what happens when sacred teachings are adapted or misinterpreted in new contexts? Critics argue that comparing texts like the Bardo Todol to other traditions risks oversimplifying their unique complexities. They caution against reducing Tibetan Buddhism to a universal spirituality, warning that such comparisons can dilute its depth and specificity. Yet, there is also value in exploring these intersections. By highlighting common themes and differences, we gain a richer understanding of how humanity has grappled with the mysteries of existence. Ultimately, the Bardo Todol serves as both a cultural artifact and a universal guide, bridging the gap between Tibetan Buddhism and the broader human experience. Its teachings remind us that while cultures may differ, the fundamental questions of life, death, and what lies beyond are shared. As we explore these connections, we ask one final question. If the Bardo Todol reveals so much about our collective journey, what other wisdom might it hold, waiting to be uncovered? The Bardo Todol, written over a millennium ago, was designed for an era vastly different from ours, a time when spiritual traditions were deeply embedded in everyday life, and death was an intimate collective experience. So, how does this ancient text, steeped in Tibetan Buddhist philosophy and mysticism, remain relevant in today's fast-paced, technology-driven world? Surprisingly, the teachings of the Bardo Todol have never been more applicable, offering profound insights into how we approach life, death, and the pursuit of meaning in the modern age. One of the most striking aspects of the Bardo Todol is its emphasis on impermanence, a concept that resonates deeply in today's uncertain world. From climate change and global pandemics to personal struggles and societal upheavals, modern life is a constant reminder that nothing is permanent. The text teaches that recognizing impermanence is not cause for despair, but a pathway to liberation. It invites us to let go of attachments, embrace change, and live fully in the present moment. This lesson is particularly valuable in a time when many feel overwhelmed by the pressures of consumerism, social media, and the relentless pursuit of success. Moreover, the Bardo Todol's focus on mindfulness aligns closely with modern mental health practices. Techniques like meditation, which were once confined to monasteries, are now mainstream tools for reducing stress and cultivating awareness. Mindfulness-based therapies, widely used to treat anxiety and depression, mirror the text's emphasis on observing thoughts and emotions without attachment. These practices, rooted in Tibetan Buddhist traditions, highlight the enduring relevance of the Bardo Thodol as a guide not only for death, but for navigating the complexities of life. But what about the text's teachings on death itself? In many modern societies, death has become a taboo topic, hidden away in hospitals and funeral homes. The Bardo Thodol, by contrast, places death front and center, presenting it as a natural, even transformative process. This perspective challenges the Western tendency to fear and avoid discussions about mortality. Instead, the text encourages us to view death as an opportunity, a moment of profound clarity and potential liberation. This shift in perspective has inspired movements like the Death Positive movement, which seeks to normalize conversations about mortality and promote a more compassionate approach to end-of-life care. The Bardo Thodol's teachings on the afterlife also offer a fresh perspective on how we think about existence. While modern science often views death as the end of consciousness, the text suggests that death is a transition, a doorway to new states of being. This idea resonates with the growing interest in near-death experiences, which have led some researchers to question the nature of consciousness itself. As we said before, studies by scientists like Dr. Sam Parnia, who investigates cardiac arrest survivors, and philosophers exploring non-local theories of mind suggest that the boundaries between life and death may not be as clear-cut as we once thought. The Bardo Thodol provides a framework for understanding these experiences, bridging the gap between ancient wisdom and modern inquiry. Another way the text remains relevant is through its teachings on karma. In an age where every action feels amplified by global connectivity, whether through social media, activism, or environmental impact, the concept of karma takes on new significance. The Bardo Thodol reminds us that our thoughts, words, and deeds leave lasting imprints, not just on ourselves, but on the world around us. This idea encourages accountability and mindfulness, offering a counterbalance to the reactive, fast-paced nature of contemporary life. Even the Bardo Thodol's focus on guiding the dead has found modern applications. In hospice care and grief counseling, practices inspired by the text emphasize creating a peaceful, compassionate environment for those nearing the end of life. These practices help individuals confront death with dignity and awareness, echoing the rituals described in the Bardo Thodol. The text's emphasis on the interconnectedness of the living and the dead also resonates in contemporary approaches to grief, which encourage maintaining a sense of connection with loved ones who have passed on. However, the Bardo Thodol's relevance is not without challenges. Its esoteric language, complex symbolism, and deeply Buddhist framework can make it difficult for modern audiences to fully grasp. Critics argue that attempts to adapt the text for Western contexts risk oversimplifying or distorting its teachings. For instance, some have reinterpreted the bardos as purely psychological states, stripping away their spiritual depth. While these reinterpretations make the text more accessible, they also raise questions about whether its true essence can survive in a secular world. Despite these challenges, the Bardo Thodol continues to inspire and evolve. Monasteries in the Himalayas still use it as a guide for the deceased, while scholars and practitioners around the world explore its teachings in new ways. Digital platforms have even begun to play a role in preserving and sharing the text, with online resources offering translations, commentaries, and guided meditations. This adaptation reflects the resilience of the Bardo Thodol, proving that its core teachings can transcend cultural and technological boundaries. The text's relevance also extends to how we think about personal transformation. The bardos are not just stages of the afterlife. They're metaphors for the transitions we face in life, from the loss of a job or a relationship to the pursuit of new goals. The Bardo Thodol teaches that every transition, no matter how challenging, is an opportunity for growth. This perspective encourages resilience and adaptability, qualities that are more important than ever in today's rapidly changing world. Finally, the Bardo Thodol offers a profound reminder of our shared humanity. Its teachings about the mind's projections, the interconnectedness of life and death, and the potential for liberation resonate across cultures and belief systems. In a time of division and uncertainty, the text invites us to look inward, confront our fears, and recognize the illusions that separate us from one another. What do you think? Can the ancient wisdom of the Bardo Thodol truly guide us in today's chaotic world? Or is it more relevant as a metaphor than a literal guide? Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear. And if this journey through the Bardos intrigued you, don't forget to like the video, hit subscribe, and join us for more.